Record. You're good.
Good afternoon, everyone. This week's parasha, as I mentioned yesterday,
Too bad.
the Torah discusses the mitzvah of Shabbat. It's the interim point between Vayakel and Pekudei. I mean, Vayakel Pekudei on one side and Trumat Tzad on the other side is the din of Shabbat. Now, the Torah in Vayakel says, the famous pasuk, Lo tvaru eish b'chol moshvotechem b'yom HaShabbat. You shall not have fire wherever you are on Shabbat. Now, what does that mean? So, as I mentioned, the Tzdokim, the Karoim, they said you can't have fire at all, even if you didn't light it, because it says Lo Tvaru Eish. So they took the pasuk literally without Torah Shabbat Peh. Problem is that if you don't have Torah Shabbat Peh, Torah Shabbat is very difficult to interpret. It almost begs that there be a Torah Shabbat Peh. So people sat in the dark, people sat in the cold, people didn't eat hot food, and they thought themselves super pious. Those that were eating chong were the goyim. But they were super pious because they didn't have any fire whatsoever. The Chazal railed against that. They protested vehemently because they said that's not what the Torah meant. And because of that, therefore, they instituted almost a requirement that everyone eat some hot food on Shabbat. And that's a custom that is universal throughout the Jewish world. Chamim, to have, so in Eastern Europe, it was choned, it was potatoes and beans and barley and meat, whatever. In many of the Muslim countries, the Jews ate hot pancakes. That was the Shabbat Chamim. But that was a universal custom and remains so until today. And that's associated with the Shabbat because not to have the wrong interpretation regarding Lo Tvaru Eish b'chol moshvotechem. Now there arises a problem here. Why did the Torah pick this malacha out of all 39 Avos malachas that we have to discuss it, so to speak, specifically? There's another halacha that the Torah did, Lo seitzu ish min komo b'yom HaShabbos, that has to do with Tchum Shabbos min HaTorah, 12 miles outside the city. And there also is a question of Eruvin, etc. But why did the Torah pick this one? So the Gemara in Shabbos has a machlokas here. Now, there was no question that they saw that there was a special quality to this malacha different than the other ones. And that's why the Torah chose it. So there's a machlokas in the Gemara, famous machlokas, whether havora lechalek yotzos or havora lelav yotzos. Why was it mentioned specifically? Yotzos means it went out of the category of all of the other malachos. So one opinion in the Gemara was lachalik, to divide. What does that mean? Rashi explains to us that it says in the Torah, lo saseh kol malach. How do we interpret that? So there were those that were willing to interpret it, lo saseh kol malacha, meaning you shouldn't do all 39 malachas. But you can do 1 or 2 or 37. Kol malacha is asur. All of the malachas are asur. And since it becomes almost impossible to do all 39, because they include all sorts of different acts that people are not capable of doing by themselves. So in effect, it would not negate the Shabbos. Because then to be someone that, God forbid, desecrates the Shabbos, he'd have to do all 39 malachos. So the Torah came lachalik. The Torah came to divide it up and said, no, any of the 39 is a desecration of Shabbos. Any of the 39 malachos that are done sufficient to be considered a desecration of Shabbos. The example that the Torah used to teach me that principle is Havara, is Eish, it's fire. And the reason is because fire is the basic creation of man. Without fire, we can't do anything. So for instance, the Torah says cooking, you can't cook without fire, without heat, without energy. The basic creation of human beings, that's why we say Borei Morei Aish on Saturday night, that was the first creation of Adam Rishon. The first human invention was fire. And out of fire, out of energy, because fire is the harnessing of energy, out of fire come all of the other advances, so to speak, of technology, etc. So therefore, Havora Lachalik Yotzes. Havora was taken out from all of the other malachos and specified here in the parsha to teach me that if you do any one of the 39 Havos malachos or their tolodos, then that is considered a violation of the Shabbos. That's considered to be the Yisur Shabbos. The other one, the Omer says, Havora Lalav Yotzos. The reason that Havora was taken out is because it has a different din. All the other 38 malachas, the Shabbos is Beskila, and it's also Bikorev. Those are the punishments for it. The person does it intentionally, he's warned not to do it, he does it v'achis, etc. So that's Bezdin, it's Mitzvah's Bezdin, and if Bezdin doesn't do that, then it's Koresh B'nei Shemayim. But Havora, L'lav Yotzos, it's only a lav. There's no chorus and there's no Mitzvah's Bezdin. So in effect, it is the least of all the malachos as far as the consequences of punishment is concerned. And therefore, it's only allowed. All right, so whatever the punishment for allowed, malchus, whatever it'll be, it'll be. But it is not to be considered the equal of the other 38 of those malachos. That's a machlokes in Gemara and Shabbos. They're havor l'lavi yotzos, or they're havor l'chalek yotzos. Now, even according to the Mandi Omar that says, even according to the opinion that says havor l'lavi yotzos, there's a famous opinion in the Achronim, Meshech Chochmah, Rabbi Simcha states it, the Or Sameach and other Achronim as well, that there's an overreaching posuk in the Torah that says Mechalalel Mos Yumos. Anyone that's Mechalal Shabbos, so there's a din of Misa. Now, the din of Misa is not necessarily that Bezdin will do it. You don't have a Bezdin. We don't have a Sanhedrin. Even though we did have a Sanhedrin, if once in 70 years there was a capital crime that they were called the Bezdin Katlonis, murderous Bezdin. The execution of a person was a rare thing in Jewish life. That's the basis for here in the state of Israel that there's no death penalty. Because you never, the Gemara itself says you never know. You don't know exactly what happened. You don't know the man's motives. In general, we like to leave things up to heaven. They'll take care of it. They take care of it before or after, generations later. There's always a reckoning. So we're not interested in that. But whenever all the Achronim say that wherever you see the Torah says most yumos, that is to emphasize to you the severity of that. That's it. That it is something that is worthy of Misa. And therefore the Meshech Chochmah says that even if you held it, that Havora l'lav yotzos, that Havora is only a lav, and there's no chiyuv mitzvah on that lav, because there's no mitzvah on the lav. Nevertheless, there is the chiyuv mitzvah of mechalalel mos yumos. That desecrating Shabbos is of such a nature that it's most yumos. It's at the top of the list. And that applies, he says, even according to the Mandi Omer that would hold that Havora l'lav yotzos. And there's a famous piece in the Chazon Ish, in Hilchos Shabbos. The Chazon Ish was asked whether Bizman Hazeh, those Jews that unfortunately are Machal Shabbos, the Farhesia, they have a din of Misa. So naturally he was asked that in theory, but he answered in practicality. So he said, Bizman said, there's no such thing as Machal Shabbos the Farhesia any longer. He says that existed at the time when there was Nevuah by Klal Yisrael, with prophecy. It was clear what was right and what was wrong. You had a Beis Hamikdash, you had Ruach HaKodesh. So then we can say these things. But he said in our time, there's no prophecy, there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no Ruach HaKodesh. So he says, you cannot say, therefore, that the din of Mechal Shabbos and Farhesia should apply. And he says, therefore, it is our task, that his Lashon is, that we should bind our brethren to us, be'avosos shelavo, with ropes that are made of love, and be makar them to the Torah instead of shouting at them or throwing stones, he says, or making an issue, because that will only be counterproductive, as we are witness to over and over again. So the question of the primacy of Shabbos remains. There's no question that Shabbos is the cornerstone of the Jewish world. How to deal with it, and what our policies should be, what our behavior should be, that is a matter of discussion and debate and wisdom. And the Lord should help us that we should have the wisdom to be able to bind people to us, with ropes that are made of love. One of his Rav told me, he said, stones are for building, not for throwing.
Very good.
And that is absolutely true. So that's the idea in this week's parsha of Chananya ben Akash, Omer not Zakari Mohu with Zakas Israel. Vicha Chirva Lahem Torah and Mitzvot Senemar. Neicha Faith and Al-Tziko Yabil Torah Yad.